Welcome to Project Foodie. Hey guys, I'm Daniel Holzman, the chef owner of the Meatball Shop restaurant in New York City.
I take after my grandmother. My grandmother was a huge fan of tiny balls.
I didn't say it.
You've just selected my Japanese shiitake and leek soup with steamed snapper and soba noodles. This is a great meal to eat on a weeknight when you want something healthy. If I was making this meal, I would definitely not make it for a Japanese person because I'm like an Italian chef. And making Japanese food when you're an Italian chef is just begging to get laughed at.
I'm kidding. Anyone would love this soup.
So this is the type of thing I would make for myself and my dear closest friends. People that I know love great food. I've got a friend of mine who's like a real Netflix and chill kind of friend, and whenever she comes over, like steamed snapper is on the menu. This recipe has 5 steps and will take about 30 minutes to cook. All right, let's get started. So the first thing we need to do before we begin is gather all of our ingredients and all the tools we're gonna need to cook this dish. In a professional kitchen, we call that mise en place. It means having everything you need sensibly laid out at a hand's reach. Here are the tools you're gonna need. I've got a pot with a lid for cooking the noodles. I have a pot for cooking the soup. It's a really shallow pot because I'm gonna cook the soup and then I'm gonna actually poach the snapper right in there. A colander for draining the noodles when they're cooked. A fish spatula, which is a spatula specifically designed for fish.
Or any spatula will do.
I have a ladle, a large mixing bowl that I'm actually gonna plunge the noodles into after they're cooked to cool them down. A knife and a cutting board. I have measuring cups. It's my favorite trick. I really love that one. Measuring spoons. I think it's really important whenever we set up our station to have some assorted spoons for tasting our food, cooking with, stirring. I always like to butcher fish on a plastic cutting board because the oils from the fish can kind of permeate the wooden cutting board's grains and get a really pervasive smell that lasts a long time. A pair of tweezers in case there are any bones in the fish that I need to remove. And if you don't have a pair of specialized fish tweezers, needle nose pliers work really well for this. A small bowl to soak my green onions in ice water. You're gonna need the following ingredients. I've got these beautiful leeks, green onions, shiitake mushrooms, soba noodles. I like to use 100% buckwheat soba noodles. These beautiful snapper fillets. Fish is highly seasonal. So depending upon the season, snapper can be really expensive or really inexpensive. Whenever I'm cooking fish, I like to go to the fish market and I like to look at the fish. In my case, I kind of have an idea of what is fresh and what isn't just from looking at it and smelling it. If you have less experience, ask your fishmonger. Ask the person at the supermarket, hey, what's fresh? When did this come in? And when in doubt, everybody has fresh salmon. Salmon sells more than any other fish, so you can always find fresh salmon, and salmon would be absolutely delicious cooked this way. Kosher salt.
Water.
Unseasoned rice vinegar, and that's really important because Japanese rice vinegar is used for seasoning sushi rice, and often it's seasoned with salt and sugar. And in this case, it says sodium-free, sugar-free rice vinegar. That's what I'm looking for. Aji mirin, which is cooking rice wine. And then I have some Japanese soy sauce. Whenever I'm cooking a Japanese dish, I like to use traditional Japanese ingredients. So there's Chinese soy sauce, there's Japanese soy sauce. I use Japanese soy sauce for Japanese dishes. If I'm being honest, they taste pretty much exactly the same. And then I have this shichimi togarashi, which is ubiquitous in every single Japanese table. In any restaurant, it's a 7-spice mix. Usually you've got Japanese chili peppers and some dried orange zest, white and black sesame seeds, some hemp seeds in here, and it's a really great seasoning that we're gonna add at the end to give it a little bit of spice. What would you serve in terms of wine with a dish like this? Asian food and Riesling go really well together. Riesling is great with sweet notes and spicy notes, and Riesling counterbalances those absolutely perfectly. I love Riesling. So this dish has 5 simple steps. First and foremost, we need to get our water on to cook our noodles, and we're gonna start our soup. After that, step 2,
We're gonna cook and cool our noodles and prepare our garnish.
Step 3, we're gonna butcher and season our fish. Step 4, we're gonna strain our vegetables and plate them. along with the noodles and poach the fish in the broth. And then step 5, we're actually gonna pull the fish out of the broth and plate it and pour the broth over the top. And then we're just gonna garnish it with the scallions. This cook-along system is based on the way that I train cooks in my restaurants. We cook everything together. So I'm gonna be here with you for every second of the process until your meal hits the plate. Feel free to hit pause, rewind, or slow it down whenever you need to. So let's get started with step 1. First and foremost, we need to get our pasta water cooking. And we're gonna go ahead and start our soup. I have this pot, and again, just like Western noodles, I wanna put plenty of water in so that the noodles have a chance to swim around and not stick together. And then also, when I add the cold noodles to the boiling water, it doesn't suck all the heat out and stop it from boiling. I need these to cook really quickly at a rapid boil. And I don't salt the water when I make soba noodles. So I've got my water going on to boil.
For approximately 9 minutes.
And again, that'll boil a lot faster if I keep it covered. We're gonna turn on our flame. And while that's going, I'm gonna go ahead and start our soup. For this soup, unlike kind of a lot of traditional Western, European, Mediterranean soups where, we're gonna cook the vegetables in the pan, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just going to make a really light vegetable broth from my shiitake and leeks.
Remove the bolster and the green from the leek.
Traditionally, Japanese soups start with a really light fish and mushroom broth called dashi. And what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna make the dashi as we cook the soup. So the vegetables that we make the dashi out of are actually going to become the soup base. Leeks grow through the dirt and they can be filled with sand. I can see in here that they're quite dirty. So I wanna make sure to clean them thoroughly. And the way to do that is I'm just gonna start on the end and I'm gonna cut them into the size that I want for my soup, which are these kind of 1/2-inch rings. And then as I get to the green end where the sand and all the dirt would be, I'm just gonna kind of clean through and discard the thicker green ends and rinse these two under cold water just to get the dirt out of there. What you wanna do is you wanna lay your leeks in the bowl, and ideally, we wanna lay them out flat so that as they cook, they don't break apart into their rings because they're gonna look really beautiful in your soup when they're done. And the shiitakes, the tops of the shiitakes are very tender and delicious, but the stems are quite tough no matter how long you cook them. So what we wanna do is just take the tip of your knife and just kinda cut the stems off of the shiitake mushrooms. These shiitakes are quite big, so we can just give them a cut in half if we want. They look really beautiful whole, but it's a really aggressive bite because they're definitely not gonna shrink at all. So we can take our mushrooms and maybe cut them in half. If there's a really big one, we can cut it into quarters so that they're around the same size. And the shiitakes have a ton of flavor that they're gonna impart in the soup broth, but they're also gonna retain a lot so that they're delicious on their own. And those are going right in our pot. We're gonna fill this with water just so that it barely covers the shiitake and leeks. And they just start to float. Then we're gonna season it with our mirin wine, and it's quite sweet, and soy sauce. I can always add more mirin and more soy sauce later. So we have our shiitake and our leeks, and they're in water with soy sauce and our mirin wine. And what we wanna do is just put this on the burner over a medium-high heat
To come to a simmer for approximately 20 minutes. This is a great time for me to clean up, organize myself, set the table, or take a little break. I suggest you do the same, or have some wine.
So we've got our shiitake and leeks coming up to a boil with soy sauce and mirin. We have our pasta water coming up to a boil, and it's time to start step 2. For step 2, we're gonna go ahead and cook our soba noodles.
And we're also gonna prep our garnish.
Soba noodles are 100% buckwheat flour. Well, the good quality ones are, at least. And they cook in about 7 or 8 minutes in boiling water. The problem with soba noodles is if you don't use them immediately after they're cooked, they clump together. And so what we like to do is fill a big bowl with cold water to shock the noodles and stop them from cooking as soon as they come out. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that ready. And then I've got a colander here that's ready in the sink for when the noodles are fully cooked. Soba noodles are really sensitive to overcooking. If they're in the water for 1 extra minute, they can just become mush. So I wanna make sure that I have my colander ready in the sink to drain the noodles as soon as they're ready.
Once your water comes to the boil, remove the lid to the pot.
We can go ahead and drop our soba noodles. And just like Western style pasta, as soon as they go in, I wanna give them a gentle stir so they don't stick together. I'm gonna drop them right into the pot.
Like pickup sticks for 8 minutes.
Give them a little stir as soon as they drop into the water so that they don't stick together. Once the water comes up to the boil, the natural agitation of the boiling water should keep the noodles in motion so they don't stick together. So our noodles are boiling, our soup is simmering, and we can take a minute here to cut our scallions for our garnish. When I'm cutting these green onions, I like to cut them as thinly as possible on a really aggressive bias so I get long, skinny strips. And then when we soak them in cold water, they're gonna curl up and make a really beautiful garnish for our fish. What we wanna do is just take 2 or 3 scallions, and you wanna trim off the kind of dry outer leaf at the bottom that might be a little bit dirty. Depending upon how old your scallions are, these could be more aggressive or less. And then I'm gonna give that a little slice just to kind of remove the root end and discard that. I can trim any of the greens that are a little bit wilted. And then if we cut these on a really aggressive angle as thinly as possible and let them soak in cold water, they're gonna curl up and look really beautiful as a garnish for our dish. So I like to separate the bottoms from the tops, make it a little easier. And then we're gonna bunch the tops up. And what I wanna do is I'm just going to slice, and you can see that my knuckles are actually making contact, but my fingers are curled under, so they're never gonna cut the tips of my fingers. Provided that I keep my fingers tips further back than my knuckles, my knuckle acts as a guide and actually slides down the food, and I can cut really quickly without worrying about cutting myself. And this is a really great skill to learn. Definitely worth the investment of time. It's kind of like learning how to, like hold a baseball bat or like a golf club. It feels weird at first, but it pays dividends because being able to cut things quickly and efficiently saves you so much time. When I cook a dish, it takes me 30 minutes, and other people might take an hour just because it takes them 20 minutes to cut the scallions. So I've got the tops on there. I can cut the bottoms in half. And then laying them flat, I can go ahead and slice those as thinly as I can as well.
Go at your own pace. It may take you longer at home to slice these, and that's okay. I'm a professional scallion slicer.
And over the course of the next couple of minutes, while these soak in cold water, they're gonna curl up and look really beautiful on top of our fish for garnish. Feel free to hit pause, rewind, or slow it down whenever you need to. So our noodles have been cooking for 8 minutes. I'm gonna bring them over and drain them into the colander. I could see all that starch making the water really milky. And as soon as I've drained them, I'm just going to dump them into my cold water and use my hands to agitate the noodles, cooling them down and separating them really gently so that they don't stick together. And that's gonna pull all the starch. And I could see my water immediately clouds up. And because I took them off the fire, the noodles are perfectly cooked. And they're gonna soften up a little bit more in the soup. Our noodles are cooled down and we've washed them so that they're not going to stick together. I can go ahead and drain these. And what I'm going to do is I can just lay these in the bowls that I'm going to use right now, because I'll heat them back up by pouring the hot soup when it's all done. My noodles go right in my bowl. For step 3, we're gonna remove any of the pin bones that the butcher left in it, season it up. I asked our butcher to remove the scales and remove the pin bones, but of course, they didn't do a really great job and there are a bunch of bones in there, which is usually the case. So I always like to take my fish and I just kind of rub my fingers. You could rub your fingers backwards from the tail up to the front and you feel any scales that are on there. You just kind of pick them off with your fingers. We don't want any scales. So I can run a knife along the fish from tail forwards, and any scales that get caught in the knife, we find them and we can just use our fingers to pull them off because we don't want any scales in the fish. And then after we've done that, we're gonna go ahead and pull out the pin bones. So the fresher the fish, the more difficult this is, and skin on fish is especially difficult. And this fish is really, really fresh. I can tell it's fresh because I can't smell anything. I mean, it's just very, very firm and translucent and has no fishy smell to it, which is ideal. What I do is I run my finger along the center here and you'll feel any bones, they actually poke you. You grab them with your tweezers. You could just kind of grab the bone and just pull straight up and the bone pulls straight out. 1 bone, 2 bones, 3 bones. They're bones all along the same line. 4, 5, 6, 7. Like, thank you so much to our butcher for just not taking any of the bones out. But I'm happy that we caught them here rather than watching my guests spitting them out at the dining room table. So that's one fillet. And then the other fillet, again, I'm just gonna run my finger along the center line and I feel the bones. And then I'm just gonna go ahead with my tweezers and pull them out one after another. So now I've got these 2 beautiful fresh fillets of snapper and the bones are all removed. When the fish is very fresh, the skin tends to curl up when it cooks. And so to try and combat that, I like to take little thin slices along the center of the fish.
And trim a bit of the tail off.
So that my fish actually looks like that. That's gonna allow some of the broth to braise it, and then by cutting into the thicker part, I'll allow the hot stock to permeate and cook that a little quicker so that the fish cooks evenly.
And you can trim the edge a bit.
And then also, it'll hopefully stop the fish from curling up too badly.
Again, trim the tail off.
I'll just make a few slices into the flesh of the fish, not all the way through and not from end to end. I'm gonna lightly season my fish with kosher salt. Step 4. So we have our noodles cooked and ready. Our vegetables have been simmering. Our fish is seasoned and ready to cook. What we want to do is remove our vegetables from the pan and begin poaching the fish in the same soup. So I'm going to move my pot over here, and I'm just going to take these beautifully poached leeks and mushrooms and plate them. And I like to use the smallest spoon I can find. So this takes as long as humanly possible.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
All right. So I got my veggies or my noodles waiting. The fish is only going to take about 3 minutes poaching in the liquid. So everything should still be nice and warm and ready. And what I want to do is I just want to gently layer my fish into the steaming liquid. And I'm going to put it back on the fire with a lid to gently simmer and steam. So we've got our snapper going back onto the flame with a lid on there, and it's time to start step 5. For step 5, what we want to do is we want to clean up. When our snapper is finished, we're going to plate it. We're going to pour the broth over the top, and then we're just going to garnish it with the scallions. Snapper has a very delicate flavor. It's extremely tasty, but it's often overpowered by the other ingredients on the plate. So I really love this simple preparation so that I can taste the flavor of the fish. It embodies the essence of the kind of like Japanese perfection can be something that's simply and beautifully prepared. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. When you find vegetables that are in season and really fresh fish, you should just serve them honestly on the plate. The fish has been cooking for about 3 minutes. It's basically as soon as the water comes back up to a boil, it's almost ready. So the fish is boiling away, and I can see the steam coming off of there, and it's giving off an amazing smell. What I want to do is just really gently pull out these fillets, and if I haven't overcooked them, they should hold together. And I'm going to lay one on top of each bowl here. I had a soup really similar to this in Japan, and they served this vinegar and soy sauce, like a ponzu sauce, on the table. And the fish was really sweet, had this subtle broth that you were supposed to add the ponzu sauce to. In my case, I like to just add the vinegar to the pan and season the broth myself. So put a little bit of the vinegar in there, give it a taste. And if it's good, we can just pour the broth over the fish.
You can also use a ladle.
Garnish it with our green onions that have been soaking in water so that they curled up. So I just pull them out, and I just kind of throw them down on my cutting board a couple times to help drain them, and then kind of untangle a few on top of each fillet. And then finally, I like to sprinkle some of our Japanese chili on top. The Japanese chili has a really floral flavor. It has a number of ingredients, but it's not terribly spicy, but it does give a little bit of heat. And it's like a real beautiful red and green. It's like Christmas, all in your mouth, but in Japan. So here we have our Japanese leek and shiitake soup with soba noodles and steamed snapper. I just really, really, really love steamed snapper. It's flaky and moist. The scallions are crunchy and fresh. And then the mushrooms are sweet, and the onions as well. The noodles are still al dente. I'm really happy we got to spend the time together making this dish. Thank you so much. I think the dish came out really delicious, and I hope yours is amazing as well. I hope you get laid tonight because of this dish. I hope you've enjoyed this Project Foodie cook along, and I hope you'll join us for more.